Psychology states that if a crush lasts longer than 4 months, what you're actually feeling is love.
I would dearly love for people to stop saying psychology says, but that's probably an uphill battle. Still, psychology is not an entity, it's not a person, it doesn't say things. It's a probabilistic science, so we have psychological studies that make claims about a particular population, and they make these claims about an average person in that population. So we don't really ever definitively say this will last 4 months and then it will be something else. It's not actually possible to say that. We just don't have the means of saying something definitive like that. So also research on crushes is only in adolescence. In adult romantic relationships, we don't really talk about this that way. We talk about romantic love, we talk about early stages of romantic love. This may also be, oh, I don't know, I have a crush on Ariana Grande, I have a crush on Brad Pitt, you know, something like that, but like a celebrity. It's not really a big deal.
Welcome to Why Complain When You Can Whine, making sense of the senseless. Join us as we attempt to make sense of toxic nonsense. So we have been gone for a little bit during the summer. I was on vacation. I had surgery. I had construction in my house. Bree's schedule has been not conducive. It's been chaotic this summer. So we are back. I don't know how regular, but we are back right now until the end of summer. I am Dr. Jody Lorman, licensed clinical psychologist, and today I have actually, my wine is called Trivia. I don't even remember buying this, but it was probably from Trader Joe's, and I have my little Mickey stopper on it. And the reason I have my Mickey stopper is I have my Disney glass is because the vacation I went on was a Disney cruise. So I have to be all Disneyed out. And we have a guest today. You probably noticed. Dr. Ina.
Ina.
Ina. Oh, I've been calling you Ina this whole time.
We haven't actually, you know, I don't always correct people, but since we're being all, you know, podcasting and all that.
Yes, thank you.
Ina Kanevsky.
I'm so
And
sorry. I got your last name. I didn't say it this time, but I had it correct. But I always said Ina. I'm so sorry. Dr. Ina.
It's not everybody does that. It's a very typical thing. My Pilates instructors keeps calling me Ina, and I've just decided I'm gonna let it be. It's not important.
Judy. I get called Judy all the time, and it's like it's Jody, and everybody calls me Judy, and it's like okay, fine. As long as it's appropriate, you can call me whatever you want, I guess. If it's not appropriate,
I mean, I would prefer people didn't, and it's spelled in a way that I thought wouldn't be a problem back in the 90s when I got here, but apparently it is.
But you go by professor, correct?
Well, no, professor is my job description.
Yeah.
So
that's what I mean. I'm sorry.
Yes.
In your job, you go by professor.
Yes, I tell my students that they can do a variety of things. And some of them do professor, and they just call me professor, and some of them do Dr. Ina, and some of them say Dr. Kanevsky. And some of them say just Ina, and I let them. And I had ones that would say Kanevsky. And not like when talking about me, which we all have done as students, right? But talking to me, which I thought was funny, and I did not object to it.
You know, it's funny because when I worked in the prison, we only went by last names. And so it was always either Doc or Larman. Inmates had to call me Doc or Doctor. Sorry, not Doc, Doctor. But anyone else, you can call me Larman, you can call me Doc. But it was so weird to hear first names. So when we talk to people outside of work, we still use last names. And then once we got to know them, if you started calling them by their first name, when you're at work, it was really hard to not call them by their first name. But in prison, you don't address people by their first name, staff by
No, I would imagine not. I was raised in an academic tradition where you addressed professors formally, which back there meant you use their first name and patronymic. That was the respectful form of address. To use their last name was considered disrespectful.
Oh, okay.
When like talking to them,
Yeah.
typically. If talking about them, you could say like professor and last name, that was respectful. Last name was always considered just disrespectful to talk about a professor or a teacher. When I got here and I had professors who use their first name with everybody, especially in graduate school, I never managed. I went through my graduate school years calling all my professors Dr. So-and-so, and that's it, no matter what anybody else said.
Well, at least you called them doctor, because as you know, we don't get called doctor a lot because we're not medical doctors. So how many times have you been told you're not a real doctor?
You know, strangely enough, not as many as I thought I would be. And it's only when they're like already mad at me
Yeah.
for things I say, so they can't like discredit what I'm saying in any other way. So then they go, "You're not a real doctor."
I always like, especially on social media, I love hearing that. Speaking of social media, we're going to get into it in just a minute, but do you have a drink?
I do have a drink, and my drink, I'm sorry, is very inadequate. This is Stella Rosa Peach, a low alcohol grape
Oh.
wine specifically with natural peach flavors.
I have not heard
I'm
of peach.
It's I think it's from Aldi's. Is what's happening. I haven't actually tried it yet, and it's supposed to be low alcohol. I'm taking medication that's not great with alcohol
Yeah.
at the time. And you don't really want me to be having like actual alcohol. I become excessively easily amused.
That's not a bad thing necessarily. There's like, usually people are either typically angry drunks or they're the I love you, man drunks.
No,
So
I just find everything funny. Let me try
yeah,
this. I haven't actually tried this. I do not know if I'm actually wanting to drink it.
we're gonna find out. We're all gonna find out at the same time.
It's all right.
Okay. Okay. So we all have
I do
both.
not know if I buy it again, but it's drinkable.
Cheers. So speaking of social media, Dr. Ina and I met because of social media. You're a psych. Tell us what you do.
Well, I teach psychology in a community college. That's my day job. And during a pandemic, to teach psychology when it was required or expected that we all make videos, I started making videos for my students using TikTok. And then I sort of shifted gradually out of making videos about concepts into videos about incorrect concepts and fake psychology facts and different kinds of misinformation about psychology. So that's mostly what I now do online is correct misinformation.
Do you, because the one thing I noticed when I got on TikTok was there is way more mis and disinformation than there is correct information.
Mhm.
And it doesn't always come from just lay people. Like I saw one of your videos recently that I so agree with. Chiropractors.
Yes, but also one of the videos I posted recently is a therapist.
I say
And
to people over and over and over again, check credentials, check credentials, check credentials, check credentials. But having credentials doesn't always mean that people are going to be.
I literally had to correct myself. Quite a while ago, I did like an article for Women's Health on how to check the source of the online information. And we've talked about how they need to have credentials. And if it just says doctor, do try to find out doctor of what.
Yeah.
And if it's the doctor of chiropractic, then maybe don't listen to that person. Right? So to see if they have credentials in whatever is it that they're talking about. And unfortunately, I had to modify this when I talk about it now, because very often, I'm going to kind of backtrack. People often complain when I correct something and they say, oh, this is like an authority fallacy, that you're saying you are a professor and therefore what you said is correct. That's a fallacy. And I'm like, no, it's not a fallacy. Because when I am saying this, I am saying it based on the current knowledge, based on sources, based on the information that is available to back me up. Right? But when somebody is just saying it and they're using their position as a therapist, as a counselor to back that up, then I have a problem.
Yeah.
Because there is nothing else, right? It's just, I am a therapist and I am going to tell you this. And then people believe it because they're the therapist. And that's, to me, that's the most upsetting out of all the misinformation right now.
Yeah, when I first got on TikTok, I got reamed because I made a video from somebody who claimed that she was a doctor and had a PhD, and all her videos were really derogatory toward mental illness. And she did a video at one point about trauma and somebody having trauma. And her video was like some song about screaming. She was screaming about the words about something like you're making it all up or something. And I looked her up and she doesn't have a PhD. She had a master's degree from an online university. And I went to her page and she's got a business. And again, nowhere does it say anything about a PhD anywhere. And honestly, if someone has a PhD, that's probably the first thing they're going to put down where they got their PhD. If they have a license, they have to put down their license number in their advertisements and things like that. Her page had none of that. And way down at the bottom of the page was, if you're having psychological issues or mental health illness, go see a professional. And it was like, wait a minute. So you're advertising mental health services and you can't do mental health services. And then you're online portraying yourself as a PhD and being very derogatory. Like she did a video on bipolar and just about people taking meds and then that makes you better. And that's bull. And it's like, so I did a video saying that this is very dangerous stuff. And it was like the second month or third month I was on TikTok and I got threats and we're going to ruin you. We're going to call the board of psychology on you. And I'm like, for what? First off, this person's in Florida. I'm in California. So, but you can't call the board of psychology. People get so angry when you call out that, sorry,
They do.
But pterodactyl hands does not mean you have autism.
No. Well, maybe when they're walking around like that, like awkward posture and all that, that's in fact a criterion. But sleeping and all the recent stuff has been about sleeping and the way that it layers. It started out with just being autism. Then I've seen autism and ADHD because I have, with this particular one, I maybe have half a dozen videos that I have done in response to it. And I can kind of trace the progression of it from starting with ADHD to starting with autism, adding ADHD. Then they added the Down syndrome for no reason whatsoever. Then it became genetic neurodivergence. Yeah, totally. That's like a sign of dyslexia if you sleep like that. Apparently. Then suddenly that is also a sign of narcissistic abuse.
Oh God. Okay.
All at the same time, right? And people just keep buying it because they relate to it, because they think, oh, I'm doing it and I'm neurodivergent. And therefore, because nobody's teaching formal reasoning and logic anymore. And they think if that's true of me, and they're saying it's true of all people who are with the same diagnosis like me, that means that's accurate.
I saw something on TikTok that said, she said, I'm ADHD and these are my symptoms. So if you have these symptoms, and one of them was she trips over things. And I'm like, oh crap, I'm doomed. And then she kind of cuts corners and walks into the wall. And I'm like, I'm really doomed then, because I am very, very clumsy. And I fell down a flight of stairs in Amsterdam in our hotel room because that's what I do. But as far as I know, I am not ADHD and there's nothing wrong with it. But I did a video on that too, saying this could be something that happens when you have, but just because it happens does not mean that you have. There might be a correlation between, but
there is, in fact, research on like the motor issues and ADHD, but it's not running into corners. It's also like postural issues. And, I have ADHD and I run into corners all the time. And I do that indeed because I am not paying attention and I am like thinking of something else, whatnot. But by itself, it's not in any way an indicator of having ADHD.
Yeah. And that's, oh, by the way, I'm sorry. I'm going to go to completely, because I never mentioned, I have my shirt that says On Cloud Wine.
So
and
cute.
I forgot to say that. So I had to say that before the end of the thing. Sorry. Totally. Now, is that a symptom of ADHD?
No,
Someone
it's
with
a
ADHD,
symptom. It's a symptom of we were trying to do this for I do not know how many months, and we almost didn't manage today
trying to get it
because
all
I
in.
couldn't get my computer to work. So I cannot understand how you would remember anything you're supposed to do after all this.
But again, someone with ADHD, that could happen. But just because it happens does not mean that you have it. That's the thing that just irritates the crap out of me, is just because it happens does not mean. And I am all for ending the stigma of mental health, but I'm not for glamorizing it. And I see so many people saying, and they're not even 18, I am NPD, ASPD, BPD, I have ASD and ADHD. And I'm like, okay, for one, why are you proud of that? And I'm not saying that you should hide it if that's what you really truly do have. You don't. But also, why are you glamorizing it? Because people who truly have mental health issues are typically distressed by them. It causes them some sort of distress.
That's in the criteria, right? Now I am
Yes.
not actually a practicing clinician. You are, but I teach this, and I teach what abnormality means, and it literally you have to have distress, and you have to have some kind of interruption to your life because of the symptoms. And people are going, well, speak for yourself when you say it's disability. It's for me, it's not. It's just the society that giving me problems. And I'm like, okay, if it's not disabling you, then it's not a disorder for you, then don't say that that's your diagnosis.
Right.
Because what's the
And
point?
because it's true, I don't like to use absolutes, but I think every DSM diagnosis has some form of the symptoms cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other areas of functioning.
I'm
And
pretty
so,
sure it's every, because when we teach like basically abnormal or psychopathology, or we can decide what to call it now because we can't figure out what is less stigmatizing. But when we teach it in general psych, this is what you start with.
yeah.
That's what we're talking about. We're talking about something that interferes or disrupts, affects your life in some way, either professional life or work life or social life or home life. You're going to be somehow disrupted.
And now when it comes to personality disorders, people are going to be like, no, it doesn't interfere. But the people around you will tell you those 5 jobs that you had that you lost were not the job's fault. Those relationships were not the relationship's fault. So it may not cause distress to you, but it causes distress to everybody around you. So, and I try to tell that to people, not my clients or anything, but people on social media. And they're just like, nope, nope. I think I told you this. I had someone who literally said to me, he was 16, by the way, we go by the spiritual meaning of the DSM. And I'm like, well, that's good. We go by the literal meaning because unfortunately
DSM doesn't have one. Now, if people want to tell me that DSM is a flawed system, absolutely. We know this. We know that some things it's like overemphasizes, some things it's underemphasizes, that it's not perfect. ICD is also not perfect. Like there is not a perfect classification system. But the point, the reason for any classification system to exist is because disorders cause problems.
Mhm.
And that's why you're trying to diagnose them and treat them.
And even when it comes to diagnosis, I have people tell me, well, I'm BPD. What are you going to do about it? And it's like, okay, for one, and NPD. And it's like, okay, you're on social media. You're 15 years old. Did you get that diagnosis in a psych hospital? Yeah. Okay, in psych hospitals, that's what they're going to diagnose you with. Unfortunately, before the age of 18, you don't have a personality disorder. Now, you may get one after the age of 18, a diagnosis of a personality disorder, but if you're a rebellious teenager, that's not NPD. We all have traits and tendencies at certain points in time, but to get the actual diagnosis, no. The thing with social media that I also have a problem with is, again, glamorizing I have so many people, I'm NPD on social media. And it's like, NPD, people with true NPD, they don't go on social media and talk about being NPD. There are a couple.
But see, those people are not using their names though.
Right.
When they do that. So I do not know. Again, you're more of an expert on this than I am, but I don't think it's quite out of the realm of possibility that anonymity would enable people to do that.
Yeah.
And mess with you that way. But also that can be just like annoying teenagers messing with you. That's also a possibility.
Because NPD doesn't care that they're NPD. There are even people on on social media. There's one in particular, two, sorry, that are self-aware NPDs. And if you go into their history, they diagnosed themselves as NPD. Then they went to therapy and told the clinician they were NPD. And then they became self-aware because they went to therapy. And it's like, okay, self-aware just means I know that I'm messing with you. I'm aware of it. So it's not this great thing. And all they're doing, they're con men or women that are getting newspaper, or sorry, do we even have newspapers anymore? They're getting magazine articles, they're getting social media, they're getting tons and tons of followers because they're telling you all the techniques that NPD and BPD and all of that do from a firsthand experience, but it's not correct. And then when someone who is a professional, not just myself, but others, says this is not, we get devalued because they have more clout and all of that. Do you find yourself getting devalued a lot by social media versus
yes, because I am, especially when it comes to like neurodevelopmental conditions, right? People go, well, how dare you invalidate our lived experience? You are a neurotypical professor, what do you know? A neurotypical doctor, because they don't usually understand that I'm not actually treating people. And I'm like, where do you see a neurotypical doctor? He's a neurotypical nor a doctor here, right? So then, things get kind of quiet. But I had that happen, and I had people get quite aggressive about it to the extent of like threatening me and so on, because I was trying to correct them, and everybody in their comments thought that they were relatable and they were giving them good information, better than the doctors are giving them. And I have a list of professionals. I think I have you in my list of professionals who are on TikTok or on social media. I need to update because I found more on Instagram that are legitimate professionals who are in fact given advice and information backed by research, backed by their actual practice and all of that. And I'm like, you can learn from those people. They're also on social media. They are available as sources of information. You do not need to learn from somebody who takes their personal experience and maps their personal experience on potentially their condition, but also then attributes everything in their personal experience to that condition and tells you that that's why they're doing it. Because any person who is autistic, any person who has ADHD also has other things going on in their life. They're not all the same person.
Yeah.
And not all of the things in the life of such a person are going to be due to these neurodivergencies.
I know two things. One, I think I got one of the worst set of comments when I said I took the DSM and it was a joke or a satire video, but I took it and said, if this were serious, and they were diagnosing their date through the DSM. And I said, don't do that. Don't get a DSM. We have been trained backwards, forwards, and upside down through the DSM. So it's not.
I know just what you're talking about.
Yeah. And it's not reading the DSM and making the diagnosis. It's how it manifests. We need to see how this behavior actually looks like, this criteria, and don't diagnose yourself. If you feel you have an issue, go to a professional with your concerns and get diagnosed. And I got so many people saying they would never go to a professional and they will diagnose themselves and they're fine with it. And it's like, if you are really distressed, but you won't go to a professional, how distressed are you really? versus wanting a diagnosis.
And not looking for help. That's kind of been my thing, though. I don't mind that people are starting that way. But then again, what's the point of having diagnosis if you are not seeking help?
Right. Because you just want that clout to say that I have the diagnosis. I have seen so many people saying, well, I'm autistic. How do you feel since teaching, that so many things with the DSM, it's came out in 2013, so it's been a while, but is now a autism spectrum, and everything is considered a spectrum, when in the past, like I started my career working with autistic kids at UCLA, and you knew, and like my son had pervasive developmental disorder. Now he's part of the spectrum, and it's different than the kids that I worked with. Yes, there's some similar traits. So how do you feel about this spectrum of autism, where there's people that are just saying, I'm autistic?
This is where it gets very messy for me, at the very least, because UCLA, was it Lovas or not Lovas?
Yeah, Lovas.
Because Lovas is, so when I was doing my master's in Cal State LA originally, my professors were all Lovas haters. They opposed to his approach, right? And my master's degree is an ABA, for which I also have gotten death threats, even though I have not really practiced. I have done behavioral consulting, which wasn't ABA, it was more evaluating kids and making recommendations through regional centers at the time. And that's where I have seen autistic kids and various other situations. And the things that got me out of that field was seeing group homes and seeing adults who were autistic or developmentally disabled, and deciding that I was not a good enough person to do this job. I couldn't handle it, so I went into research from there, right? But when I was doing that master's, again, it was not autism focused at all. ABA became autism focused subsequently, which I never quite understood. Like, I know how it happened, but I still don't understand how people let it happen.
Because ABA, explain what ABA is. Because for me, because I worked with Lovas, but it was after the all the controversial stuff was done, and he like hopefully learned his lesson. But I worked with him. I was a senior therapist, and I went and worked with this one boy from 3 to 5, and then a couple other families. And ABA at that time was just breaking down behaviors to their, and like making a bed. You don't think about making a bed and all the little individual steps that go in it, because we know how to do it. But when you're trying to teach it to someone, you have to start with taking off the sheets one corner at a time, doing the very basic minimum up to the behavior that you want, and chaining and
right. So that's not really what ABA is.
Okay.
In theory, it stands for Applied Behavior Analysis. So my doctoral degree is in experimental behavior analysis, and it did not involve any developmental disabilities or neurodivergencies at all. I was working with pigeons and neurotypical, well, mostly neurotypical children in regular classrooms, at least how they were understood at the time, during my doctoral degree. And my master's, I was actually working with college students on something called joint control, which is an aspect of language learning. This was my advisor's baby at the time, back there. But when I did like the consulting, that involved some elements. And this was before ABA became codified and before there was certification. And I think the process, like the beginnings of certification and how it was done, have a lot to answer for, because they've oversimplified the rules. ABA technically is a science. It's an applied science of behavior. It's when we're looking at human behavior in this case, because that's applied. Experimental does mostly animals. And we're looking at what is the function of the behavior. And if that behavior is something that doesn't work for the individual, then you're trying to replace it with something that serves the function.
and is not potentially harmful to the individual. So the tricky thing, the problems that happened is when they started not quite considering what is harmful to the individual, but looking at what do teachers not like, what do parents not like. And not like harming them, right? Like obviously if a child is hitting you, that's harmful to you, right? But if a child is going like this, that's not really harming anybody, generally speaking. And that is where kind of we have this issue of a lot of criticisms of ABA, where things were suppressed and focused on needlessly, and no replacements basically were provided. And that was about social acceptability of kids, right? And so instead of changing socially acceptable standards, they've tried to change the kids to fit the socially acceptable standards. And that's what Lavas gets blamed for. A lot of it, though, it's skills learning. It's, as you say, how do you make your bed? How do you brush your teeth? How do you go to the bathroom? A lot of what I did when I was still, before I got my degree, when I did this consultant, was coming up with plans for potty training, including in adult facilities, like how do you get this person to use the bathroom and not use a diaper, because diapers are not healthy in grown people. You know, you get all kinds of problems from them. Or how to communicate. Like my internship involved a special education school and teaching a young man there how to sign please and point at an object, because he was not previously taught any means of communicating at all at that point, right? So you do things like that, and you do them using methods that were taken from experimental science and then applied. So like, for example, chaining, which is what that breaking down bed making into steps is, shaping, which is what I was using with this young man, like gradually get into the correct movements. So there are a lot of techniques, what you use those techniques for, and what consequences you apply to success. That is where we have a lot of kind of conflict and problems, and a lot of people being angry about ABA. Of course, the big backlash against ABA happened because somebody wrote a paper criticizing it, and this person doesn't have the slightest idea of what that is or what's it for. I usually take a quote from her and show it to my students like halfway through learning class, and I ask them, find at least 5 errors in this little paragraph. There are more than 5. There's all kinds of things wrong, but that ship can kind of sail, like this is what happened, and they have to kind of backtrack and reverse this damage. But what happens is, if you are coming from that background like I have, that I have this education and I have this knowledge, and people are finding out and they immediately mad at me, even though, no, I have not tortured any autistic children. It's not what I have ever done. I did not go into practice. I did not apply it. And as I said, my advisors were very much against the discrete trials method of Lovaas. They like advocated for different techniques. And that's kind of what we were taught to do, and didn't focus on autism so much. So, but there was a lot of like, you learned obviously all the abnormal stuff. And it's kind of funny to me because I'm now thinking about it. When I read the DSM, you know, that medical student syndrome, right? You read the book and you're like, that's me, that's me, that's me.
In my master's program, when we did we were going through the DSM, every week we'd be like, this is us. Everyone in the class was like, oh no.
So I read the autism stuff, and we had like case studies accompanying it. And I'm like, well, that totally sounds like me. But I know, I was like, I'm smart enough. I know about the medical students. It's not me. It can't be me, right? Like, I'm not going to do that. I, in fact, during my master's, like during that class, I wrote a paper. This was back in like 95 or 96. I wrote a paper on how ADHD is overdiagnosed. Back then in the 90s, where now we have all these adults who have not been diagnosed then, who are being diagnosed now, right? And I went and consulted some authority at USC who was also promoting that, and I can't remember his name now. And I obviously don't have a paper because it was on a floppy disk. It was for class, not publication,
I
right?
remember the floppy disk, yes.
But somebody was asking me recently, like, you know, what do you think about, like, oh, somebody claimed that autism is not autism, ADHD supposedly is overdiagnosed now. And this is news. This is because women are getting diagnosed. And I'm like, no. It was sad back in the 90s at the very least, when mostly boys were diagnosed. And a lot of times, and I will still maintain that that's true, a lot of times, probably boys, kids in school, right, get overdiagnosed because they're not doing behaviors acceptable to teachers and parents.
Yep. I would get a lot of clients in the 90s, 94, when I had my master's. I worked as a psych assistant. So I was in private practice with another clinician, a psychologist. And I cannot tell you how many kids I got that parents would say, the teachers say he has or she has ADHD. It's like, how are they at home? Fine. How are they out in public? Fine. They're just antsy in class. And it's like,
They don't like class. The class is boring.
yep.
The work
Either
in class
they
is
are
not
too
stimulating.
smart or they don't understand it. Because if you look
Yeah.
at my report cards, maybe I am ADD, but if you look at my report cards from kindergarten through high school, through 12th grade, every single report card, and I don't like to use absolutes, but every single report card said, talks too much, disrupts the
You know, I am not going to sit here and diagnose you, but
I would finish my work and I would talk to everybody else. Why are you not finished? Why is this not done? It was easy for me. Why not you? Why can't we talk? Yeah.
I went to Soviet school. We weren't allowed to talk.
Oh God.
Talking was not an option. We sat facing forward. There weren't little groups. There weren't like anything that you see in schools here. It was always like you sit at a desk like this. That was not, talking was not an option, but I would bring a book and read it under, the table. And then, I would daydream, and then I would forget the book in the classroom. I would every day come home without stuff that I'm supposed to have. And there were like continuous like issues like that. That's why I knew like I was doing things in childhood, but I had good grades because I was interested in learning. Not in class. I would just read the books in the summer when they gave them to us. So, that this was, but back then I said, well, I don't need that. But then I got married, I had kids, and I was thinking, well, everybody in my family seems to be ADHD diagnosable. But we don't need to do that. I was still like on that. And this is where I think we may disagree a little bit about this whole self-diagnosis train.
Mm-hmm.
Because here's what I was thinking at the time, right? When my kids were in school, right? I'm thinking, I'm sending them to like a gifted school. So this gifted school should be good for them. It should like occupy them enough. It's small classes. They're going to get individual attention. It will not be an issue. It absolutely was an issue.
Oh.
It was an issue. And that's because I didn't send them to gifted school. I sent them to a school that was technically like officially a gifted school, and you had to test in and all that. But it was really a school for grade motivated children of successful parents.
That's not the same thing.
No, that's kind of what we have realized eventually. Yeah. And a little bit too late, and we didn't really have many options at the time. So they've continued until middle school, and then we left from there. But they had kids who kind of taught about grades early on, and they understood. And I decided that I'm not going to push my kids the way that I was taught to be grade motivated as a child. And that was maybe a mistake. I don't know, but they weren't motivated by grades. And my son, like when he already knew how to solve math problems, he did not want to write down all the answers. Yes. So by third grade, right, like I was kind of pushed into, you have to get him seen, like there is something wrong. And I'm like, yes, I know what's wrong. I just didn't think I needed that because I am telling you how to deal with him. I was already at the time, right, a PhD psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
With training and education in that like specific kind of area. And I'm telling them, you need to like chart his behavior. I will provide consequences at home. You just need to like notice what he did and what he didn't do, because he's not motivated by what you're doing in class, all these work pages. He wants to learn. He just doesn't want to do that. That's boring to him. And they're like, no, we have all the children in our program who are intrinsically motivated. And we don't do extrinsic rewards. And I'm like, really? You think
Most
any
kids
kids in
are
your
not-
class want to do those work pages?
Yeah, most kids are not intrinsically, no.
No, because a lot of times you have them do tasks. In order to learn, you have to study.
Yeah.
The quote from Natalie Portman that I often use with my students, I'm gonna paraphrase it, but she said something, I like learning. Learning is a lot of fun. It's the studying that I hate.
Yeah.
Because learning technically is an outcome of studying. And it's cool when you know things. It's interesting to know things, right? But like practicing things and memorizing things, that's boring. So of course there needs to be additional motivation, especially for kids. And they didn't believe me. Of course, they also didn't call me doctor. They called all the parents who were male, no
Yes.
matter what their degree was, MD or PhD doctor. But if
Yes.
you were a mom and you went to help in the classroom, you were Mrs.
Remind
Gifted
me,
school
I
that
got something to
supposedly,
say about that. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, they were trying to raise accomplished children, right? So yeah, we went. I knew he was diagnosable. I knew like everybody, my daughter, my husband, myself. I knew we were all diagnosable. So I went, I got him diagnosed. And the psychiatrist, of course, prescribed medication, which we never did for him. But he also prescribed essentially the same exact thing I was telling them to do.
Yeah, of course.
And then they did it.
Yeah.
And it helped.
Okay, here's my thing with self-diagnosis. I am not against taking it to a professional and saying, I think I might be or have or whatever. I had a couple of 13, 14-year-olds come to me and say, two of them said, I think I'm ADHD. We did the screen. I talked to the parents. Their grades were good. I'm like, you, according to the screen, you're not. I mean, they didn't even like pass the screen, if you will, or they passed the screen, whatever you want to call it. And one of the girls was like, but wait a minute. I said this, I mean that. I said that, I mean this. I'm like, I'm sorry. Even if you have these symptoms, we can treat the symptoms. We can work on the symptoms, but you don't have the diagnosis. Sorry. And then one of them turned around and said, but my friend said I'm ASD also. I'm like, okay, we've talked enough. I don't see it. So the mom asked me what she should do. And I said, if you really believe that she does have ADHD, take her to a neuropsych, get all the testing done. I'm telling you, versus the screen and all the appointments that we have had, the sessions, I don't see it. But she got it off of social media and her friends that she has all these things. So if you really are worried about it, I can give you tricks and techniques and tools and all that, unless you're going to put her on medication, unless your reasoning and rationale is to put her on medication, all of these tricks and techniques you should do anyways. And if you don't want to do them and you just want medication, go and get the neuropsych test.
I'm with you on that one. That is the thing. That's kind of what I tell people when they ask me about self-diagnosis. I'm saying if you're struggling with something and you're seeing advice for something similar but caused by something else, like behavioral change advice, you can take that behavioral change advice. You can accommodate yourself. If Casey Davis says that for ADHD, she recommends that you put vegetables into door, which by the way has been very helpful to me as advice, right? Then do it. If you're forgetting about your vegetables, put them in a door. Why won't you do that? There is no rule that you have to have a diagnosis to do that.
Yeah, I tell
Right.
people, even if you don't have ADHD, I think this is a really good thing. If you make coffee in the morning or whatever your kitchen is like, put the coffee here, the mugs right there, the coffee right there, the spoons, everything around. So you're not walking around the kitchen until you're doing 18 other things. I think that's a good advice for anybody.
You know, I still walk around the kitchen doing 18 other things.
But you were diagnosed.
Yes, if you disrupt me in the process of making coffee, which
Yeah.
is exactly what happened today. I went in the kitchen to make my coffee, and then my husband talked to me about like remodeling that we're doing. And then I went to look something up online, and then I did something else. And then it was 2 hours later, and I still haven't had coffee.
You know, the more I think about it, I may be ADHD because I call it multitasking. I do 18 different things before I finish. I finish them all.
I'm not good at those things. That's the thing, right? Like all
That's the
these things get
difference. Yeah.
disrupted. People are not good at multitasking, generally speaking.
Yeah.
I will tell you though, the way that I arrived at acceptance that I should do something about it was because I couldn't do my grading during a pandemic.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't get myself to do it. It
Yeah.
was like mind-numbing task. I'm in teaching because teaching is reinforcing. The classroom environment is like what I enjoy. Talking to people, explaining things to people is what I like to do. This is also why I started making TikToks, because I can't talk to myself for an hour.
I can.
I need a person, you know, or I need some feedback, or I need to have like little snippets, and then I can do it. I cannot do an hour. And I could not record like long lectures, so I started doing little tidbits. But as I, been doing this, I have seen several professionals talking about women and ADHD and being perimenopausal and how much worse it gets. And this is when I caved, because I also realized if I didn't need help professionally, I probably wouldn't seek. That's also kind of my issue with this, right? I wouldn't seek diagnosis because, yes, I always knew I was diagnosable, right? But I had structures around my work. Lots of things, especially any kind of paperwork, always got done last minute. I never like to do grading, always be last minute, always like stay up all night to finish something when I really have to give it back. But I was able to maintain structure around going to work and having a routine and all of that, right? Once it got disrupted,
It's a mess.
and I was stuck on Zoom during a pandemic, I just couldn't. By the end of like the first school year, right, spring of 2020, like I absolutely could not. I think everybody got an A that semester.
It's just easier.
Because I was like, as long as you turn stuff in.
Yeah.
Because a lot of that stuff was like so overdue on grading that I just had to give them full credit on it, because they can't, revise it anymore. So as long as they did something, they were okay. So I was also, however, noticing during that time, and I don't know if that's also might be your observation, because again, you're a lot more clinical than I am, training and everything. That environment disrupted people who are not ADHD as well. And this is kind of what I'm trying to tell them, is that, yes, this was all traumatic. Your social life was disrupted. Your structures were disrupted. You had to do things by yourself that you don't like to do. And that's, you don't have to have ADHD to struggle with that. The social interaction, especially for kids who were at the time middle high school age kids, right? Your social interactions got disrupted. Your college years got destroyed, right? Everything was the same. And then you wonder why you don't remember. Well, because I don't remember those years very well either. I remember like bits of, and they were recent and I'm an adult, right? Because it was just bad. It was, everybody had a bad time. And then you just like sitting online and you're on social media and you're seeing all the bad things happening and
doom scrolling. Yep.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that creates patterns that may then end up being disruptive to your life, even if you don't have
Mental health
actual condition. You didn't have it as a child. You didn't have it before any. So if it's a result of that, that's not ADHD, that's something else. The solutions behaviorally may be similar, but you really shouldn't be taking stimulants.
That's one thing. Whenever I get clients, I tell them, unless I actually had a client this morning, and I said, look, I'm going to give you this diagnosis because I have to, because of billing. So I want to let you know what it is and why, but don't get caught up in the diagnosis. So many people get caught up in their diagnosis, not the symptoms. We're going to treat the symptoms, and I'll tell you why I'm giving you this diagnosis. And she was like, oh my God, that's great. This is the first time anyone's ever explained it to me like that, like why I have this diagnosis. I'm bipolar too. I was diagnosed in the 90s and I didn't realize it. I remember telling my husband I had very my husband telling me, I had very high highs and very low lows. And my mom said the same thing. almost to verbatim. I have very high highs and very low lows. And then I was looking through my medical records and I saw that my doctor had put bipolar in the 90s. In the early 2000s, I was diagnosed. And then lo and behold, my inmates diagnosed me. They would just say to me when I was explaining bipolar 1 and 2, when I got to bipolar 2, they'd be like, Dr. Lerman, that's you. And I'm like, okay, we're not talking about me right now. Okay. We're not going to say anything. So, one of my friends is a neuropsych and I was saying, I'm bipolar-ish. And he's like, bipolar 2. I'm like, bipolar-ish, bipolar 2. So usually people typically, once they're given a diagnosis, aren't like, yeah, I'm going to tell everybody like they do on social media. It's more of a trying to process that that's what you have and what you are. It's nice to know there's a reason for it, but it's not, yeah, I'm going to tell everyone, I'm going to put it on my social media account.
But
and everything.
social media does something. And I think like I understand, especially in that context, on the tail of the pandemic, on the tail of the shutdowns and everything, especially for these young people who are doing it,
Made you feel
this creates
included?
community.
Okay.
This creates community and they can now talk to each other and they can share with each other and they can relate to each other.
But it's also, I love social media for the support, and people find out things that they never would have in diagnoses that they have. But I can't stand social media because of the misinformation and the everybody having the rainbow of the alphabet of ADHD, ASD, ASPD, and on and on and on. And I tell
Wait,
them,
but about everybody, something that I've seen somebody say like back in maybe 2021 or 2022, so it's been years and I don't remember who said it. It's something like not everybody on social media has ADHD, but everybody with ADHD is on social media.
yeah, that's okay. You're right.
And so that, I don't know because we don't have statistics and because algorithms work on those kids, they also work on you and me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what we are seeing is also a side of TikTok. Frankly, I'm a lot more on Instagram now because TikTok
Me
is
too.
just treating me very badly. But the side of social media that we see is the side of social media that is shown to us based on us and what we have seen and what we like, right? So I think that there is a whole other side of social media. My kids were just in New York and they were there for like reasons of visiting my daughter's girlfriend, but they spent an evening with my relatives. We have fairly distant-ish relatives in New York. And so the kids went to spend time with them. And the granddaughter in the family, she's middle school age girl, and she likes TikTok, but she likes, Charlie D'Amelio.
Mm-hmm.
And if you showed her to me on the street, I would not recognize her. In fact, daughter and I have gone to VidCon in June, and she was in elevator with Charlie D'Amelio, and she only realized it after. Because she doesn't, like, we don't see that content.
My son always teases me because he'll be like, it's big on TikTok. Oh yeah, that's right. You don't look at that side of TikTok. And I'm like, sorry.
So for you and me,
22.
exactly, for you and me, we may be on a side of TikTok where it looks like everybody has some kind of mental health condition, whether real or they think they have it. But it's not all of TikTok because we don't see the majority of what is on TikTok for like regular people.
Right.
Who are not in our field or connected to these kinds of things, right? So, like this young girl was like really excited about my daughter being like TikTok famous and was trying to, ask her, do you know this person? Do you know this person? And my daughter's like, I know these people exist, but they're not people I spend time talking to.
Yeah.
Right. So my circles, like people that I actually interact with, right, people I've become mutuals with, include a lot of psych and academic professionals like yourself and other people, right? They include a lot of like, I guess, activist people. because of my other interests and, the Jewish TikTok, which is a whole separate conversation.
Yes, and I would like to on another podcast, if you are willing to discuss that.
Yeah.
Me being Jewish as well. So,
Yes.
yes.
We can do that because that's several kinds of a mess now.
Yes.
And I'm seeing it from many different ends at this point, like the pro and against and extreme and everything. And it's just, and it's interesting because Instagram algorithm is not as precise as TikTok algorithm, which kind of freaks me out about how precise TikTok algorithm is. Do you know, until I started debunking misinformation, I did not see any of the misinformation.
Oh, interesting.
I first saw it because a mutual of mine debunked something, and I was like, I should help him out because he's a graduate student and I'm already a professor, so I'm going to help. And so I did it, and that's kind of how it happened. And after that, because that one video became very viral, Psychology Says No Such Thing one, people followed me, and then they started tagging me in all of this misinformation content. And they started making stitches and responding to it and so on. But I still didn't see it by myself. Like if I scrolled my For You page, I would not see any of it. Very, very occasionally something would slip in. But most of the time I didn't see it. On Instagram, if I post a reaction to something, like this annoying guy, Josh, who does psychology videos against a wooden wall. You've seen him?
Yeah.
According to psychology, which none of that is ever true. I've responded to his stuff and people like tagged me in his stuff to respond to it. And then I started actually getting his videos and I'm like, no, thank you. I don't want to see it unless I have to see it. But Instagram like feeds that to me, right? TikTok never did, still doesn't. I
started doing narcissists because I was sadly in a narcissistic relationship. Whole other story. You can go back and watch the podcast on that. But so I was getting a lot of that right off the bat. And then I started one time debunked someone, and that's when it all started with that stuff. But I'm not on TikTok as much as I used to be. I kind of just post my vacation videos and stuff like that. I did want to go back really quick when you were talking about all the men being called doctor no matter what. When I worked in prison, all of the men, social workers, nurse practitioners, it didn't matter, were called doctor, and they never corrected ever. And I would correct because I'm like, oh, you mean Mr. So-and-so. Women, not so much. And I'm not this pro-feminist, oh my God, we got to do this, but I'm sorry, there is misogyny all over the place, especially in our profession. I'm not going to start carrying flags about it, but I'm not going to accept it either. No. When my son was getting his first IEP, the school, it was a school psychologist and a speech pathologist, they did his assessment. And he was PDD, which at the time was not in the spectrum. And at the time got this many services, where autism got this many services. So we were at this assessment, and it was mainly, sadly, minorities. We were one of the very few white people there. And the woman said to me, one of the psychologists or speech pathologists said, oh, he's autistic. And I said, no, he's not. And they said, yeah, he is. And I'm like, okay, first off, you're a speech pathologist. You're not qualified to make a diagnosis. You can make a category that is put in school, but you can't make a diagnosis. And they said, well, you said, how is he at Chuck E. Cheese? And I said, he's not okay, but neither am I. I can't deal with Chuck E. Cheese. Trust me, I worked for UCLA years before I got pregnant, 2 years. So I was looking for that. I was looking for the head banging and all that stuff. They're like, why? And I said, because I worked at UCLA. I am a licensed clinical psychologist. You are a speech pathologist and a school psychologist. You are not qualified to make diagnoses. And the rest of the time, and it's not me being paranoid, the rest of the time they were like looking at each other, rolling their eyes when I would say things. And I'm just like, really? And I read the report, and it's like, mom says this, mom says that. And I called up the school and I said, no, I'm sorry. You have people, we're English speaking primarily, and I'm a psychologist, and I'm offended. Now you have people in authority giving this supposed diagnosis to all these children and parents who are minorities, who very few speak English, and they're going to take it from an authority person. You are not allowed to make a diagnosis. I was pissed because it was like, oh yeah, mom's a psychologist. Mom knows everything. They were literally in front of me rolling their eyes and stuff. And it's like, this is my son. I don't care that I'm a psychologist. I care that he gets the treatment that's appropriate for him. Since then, he's had 8 years of speech therapy. He's had social skills therapy, occupational therapy, behavioral therapy, gross motor skills therapy, healthy relationships therapy, and social skills. So if you didn't know, you wouldn't know necessarily, but that's all helped. They don't give that with autism. Now, maybe now they do, but it's like I tell my clients, advocate for yourself, advocate, 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 even with me. If you don't like something I'm doing, say something. So especially, and I hate to use this, but there's misogyny and the whole, oh, you're a psychologist. Okay, sure. But if men did it, it's gospel, it's the word, it's everything.
Well, that's why Jordan Peterson is popular. I know. I know.
Don't get me started. So
that's a whole extra podcast. Jordan Peterson and what's his name? Andrew Huberman.
Yes. So on that note, we need to wrap it up. We're getting to the end. I would love to have you back if you will come back and we could talk about that. You're going to get a different side of me with that one. And the anti-Semitism. We did a video, both Brie and I did a podcast on anti-Semitism right now. We did that in October, actually. In October, November, we did it. But it is rampant. I have not been on TikTok. That's part of the reason why, where I don't want to see on my video comments that are totally separate from everything. Are you a Zionist? Are you this? Are you that? It's like, okay, this is too much. So that's part of the reason I haven't been on.
It was almost refreshing to me to get the Nazi anti-Semitism on a recent video.
Oh, really?
The Christian alt-right, because I posted video about the purity culture. And so many comments, oh, you are a Jew, that's why. Oh, but that knows why you're talking, things like basically standard anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Because that's where I always expected it to be. I did not expect what's been happening, more or less recently.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but TikTok's a mess that way. My workplace is a bit of a mess this way. I am actually in the process of writing a 30+ page document of a timeline of events since the spring of 2022 on my campus or in my college district that pertain to marginalization of the Jewish people and anti-Semitism.
So I would love to continue this. You just say when. We're going to do this again. Definitely, because yeah.
Okay, I will find better wine because this did not go very well.
So
okay.
Thank you so much. You guys like, subscribe, share. We are going to have Dr. Ina back again soon, hopefully. Any last words to leave us with?
Pay attention.
Do your research.
And use critical thinking.
Oh my God, critical thinking is like, I used to teach it to inmates. Inmates can learn it. Why can't the rest of the world?
Anybody can learn it, they just don't want to.
Oh, yeah. So we will see you soon, I hope. Thank you so much. This has been a year in the making, by the way. And
because I have ADHD and I'm disorganized.
But I am so happy we did it, and I hope we will do it again soon.
Okay, let's do it again.